took the job because I was tired of people. That sounds worse than I mean it. After 6 years as a county deputy, I had seen enough domestics, enough overdoses, enough teenagers wrapped around telephone poles at 2 in the morning to know that I needed a long break from the human race. When I found the listing for a perimeter monitoring officer with a company called Lassiter Land Management, it read like a prescription written just for me. Remote location, overnight shifts, environmental containment security. The pay was better than it had any right to be, and the job description made it sound like I would spend 12 hours a night driving a gravel road and watching deer on trail cameras. I figured the worst thing I would deal with was boredom. I was wrong about that. The operations building sat about a quarter mile off a county road in the rural Ozarks, southeastern Missouri. It was small, single-story, metal siding, no signage beyond a modest placard that read Lassiter Land Management, Site 4. It looked like the kind of outbuilding you would find on a timber lease. Nothing government about it, nothing that would make you slow down if you drove past. My supervisor was a man named Colton Rains. He pulled up in a county truck with no department markings the afternoon I arrived, shook my hand, and walked me through the building like he had done it 100 times before. The inside was plain. A desk, a two-way radio, a row of monitors connected to trail cameras along the perimeter fence, a coffee maker that looked older than I was. A printed laminated sheet of rules was fixed to the wall beside the desk. Colton told me to read it carefully and then left me alone with it. Most of the rules were what you would expect. Check the fence line every patrol. Report damage or breaches immediately. Maintain radio contact at shift start and shift end. But 3 of the rules were different. They were listed at the bottom, separated from the rest by a blank line, as if someone had added them later. The first one read, "Do not approach the valley floor between 10 at night and 4 in the morning." The second read, "If lights are visible from the ridge, do not attempt to identify their source." The third read, "If someone on the other side of the fence asks you for directions, do not answer. Do not confirm your location. Return to the operations building and radio in." I read them twice. Then I asked Colton about the last one. He was halfway to his truck by then. He stopped and turned around and looked at me for a moment, like he was deciding how much to say. Then he told me it had only happened twice in the 6 years he had managed the site, but that I needed to understand the instruction was not flexible. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed. Then he handed me the keys to the patrol truck and drove away. I figured the contamination story explained most of it. Old mining operation, legacy chemicals in the soil, liability concerns. The stranger rules were probably just overcautious legal protection dreamed up by some attorney who had never set foot in the woods. I was not spooked. I was just glad to have a job where nobody was going to cry in the back of my vehicle or bleed on my uniform. The first few nights were quiet in exactly the way I had hoped. The perimeter road was a rutted gravel loop that took about 45 minutes to complete. The fence was 8 feet of chain link topped with angled barbed wire. Nothing special. I drove, I checked the cameras, I listened to the coyotes and the owls and the wind moving through the trees. It was the most peace I had felt in years. On my third night, Around 11, I reached the high point of the perimeter road. It was a ridgeline on the eastern side that gave a partial view down into the valley below. I stopped the truck and stepped out to stretch my legs. That was when I saw the lights. Not campfire light, not flashlights bobbing through the trees. These were street lights, a faint but unmistakable grid of warm, steady light glowing through the canopy below, laid out in the orderly pattern of a small town. I could see the geometry of it, streets in a grid, clusters where buildings would be, the glow of what might have been a parking lot or a town square. I stood there for a long time. Then I pulled out my phone. No cell service, which was normal this far out. But I had an offline maps application. I opened it and looked at the valley. According to every map I had, there was nothing down there. No town, no roads, no structures, just topographic lines showing a river drainage and unbroken forest. I remembered the rule on the wall. If lights are visible from the ridge, do not attempt to identify their source. I got back in the truck. I told myself it could be a work camp, maybe a logging outfit running late. But the lights did not look temporary. They looked permanent. They looked like a town that had been sitting in that valley for a very long time. Over the next several nights, I saw the lights every time I stopped at the ridge. Same position, same warm glow. One night, I brought the binoculars from the operations building and glassed the valley from the high point. I could make out rooftops, a water tower, what looked like a church steeple. The town was real. It was down there, and it was not small. It looked like it could hold a few hundred people, maybe more. I started paying closer attention to the trail camera feeds. Most of the cameras faced outward, watching the fence from the outside, which made sense if the job was keeping trespassers out. But 2 cameras faced inward, pointed into the restricted zone. I had assumed these were for monitoring wildlife. Deer, bears, the usual. Now I watched them with different eyes. On one of those inward cameras, around midnight on my 8th shift, I caught movement. A figure walking along a path about 30 yards inside the fence. The person was moving at a normal pace, heading in the direction of the valley. They were dressed in regular clothes, a jacket, boots, nothing unusual. They did not look distressed or lost. They looked like someone walking home after a long day. I watched the figure until they disappeared into the tree line. Then I sat at the desk for a while, staring at the monitor, waiting to see if anyone else would come through. No one did. But the image of that person walking so calmly into the dark toward a town that should not exist stayed with me through the rest of the night. I radioed Colton during the next shift change. I kept it professional. I told him I had observed lights in the valley, consistent with a settlement, and asked whether it was a known installation. There was a long pause. Then Colton's voice came back flat and even. Acknowledged. Continue your rotation. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up question. Just acknowledged, like I had reported a downed tree branch. On my day off, I drove to the nearest real town and tried to find out what I could about Lassiter Land Management. Their website was bare bones. No staff directory, no physical address, just a P.O. box and a general inquiry email. The company appeared to hold contracts with 3 different counties in the region for what was described as long-term environmental site monitoring. I searched for any record of mining contamination, matching the location of Site 4, EPA filings, remediation records, anything. There was nothing. No contamination had ever been documented in that area. I went to the county recorder's office and asked about the parcel of land inside the perimeter fence. The clerk pulled up the records without much interest. The land was owned by a trust with a name I did not recognize. It had been held by the same trust since the early 1950s. There were no building permits on file, no utility connections, no road access recorded. According to every official document in existence, the land inside that fence was empty forest and had been for over 70 years. But I had seen a town down there, streetlights and rooftops and a water tower. I tried asking Webb Tansley about it. Webb was the daytime officer, a quiet man in his 40s who I only saw for a few minutes during shift changes. He was friendly enough in a surface-level way, but the moment I mentioned the lights in the valley, something in his face closed like a door. He told me Colton had given them both the same instructions on day one. They did not discuss observations from their shifts. He said he had been on the job for 2 years and he followed the rules because the rules were there for a reason. Then he said something that I have not been able to shake since. He said, "I do not look into the valley during my shifts. I have not since my first month. I would recommend you stop too." I did not stop. 3 weeks into the job, around 1 in the morning, I was doing my perimeter check on the northern stretch of fence when my headlights caught someone standing on the inside of the chain link. A woman, middle-aged, wearing a light jacket and jeans. She was just standing there with her hands at her sides, looking out at me through the fence. I stopped the truck. I did not get out. My hand went to the radio on instinct. The woman did not ask for directions. She said, "Are you the new one?" I did not respond. I sat behind the wheel with the engine running and the headlights on her and tried to decide what to do. She tilted her head slightly, the way someone does when they already know the answer to what they are about to say. "You can see the lights from up on the ridge, cannot you?" It was not a question. "We know you are watching. It is all right. Everyone watches at first." Then she turned and walked back into the dark tree line, heading toward the valley. She did not hurry. She walked like someone who knew exactly where she was going and was in no rush to get there. I watched her disappear into the woods, and then I sat in the truck for a long time with my heart going faster than I wanted to admit. I radioed Colton. It took almost a full minute of static before he picked up. He asked me what the woman said, word for word. I told him. He was quiet. Then he asked, "Did she ask you to come inside the fence?" I said no. "Good," he said. "If that changes, you call me immediately. Not on the radio. Use the landline in the building." The radio clicked off. There was a landline phone in the operations building that I had assumed was disconnected. I checked it the next night. It had a dial tone. There was one number taped to the base of the phone. No name beside it, just 10 digits written in black ink on a strip of white tape. After that, I could not let it go. I drove to Colton's office, which turned out to be a rented room above a hardware store in a town called Selma, about 40 minutes from the site. I sat down across from him and told him I needed answers, or I was walking away from the job. He did not argue. He did not seem surprised. He leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. And then he started talking, like a man setting down something heavy he had been carrying for too long. Lived there full time. They had homes. Lived there full time. They had homes, routines, a way of life. But Grayton did not appear on any map, and it never had. It was not hidden by any government agency. It was not classified or restricted in any official capacity. It simply did not register. Surveyors who had walked that valley came back with notes describing empty land. Aerial photographs showed nothing but unbroken tree canopy. GPS coordinates inside the valley returned errors or rerouted to nearby locations. The town was there, but it was as if the land itself refused to be known. And the people who lived there did not leave. They had not left in decades, as far as anyone could tell. Colton said the job was exactly what it looked like, just not for the reason I had been told. There was no contamination. There never had been. The perimeter existed to keep outsiders from wandering in, because people who entered the valley did not come back. Not always right away. Sometimes they would emerge days later, confused, unable to remember what they had seen, missing hours they could not account for. And sometimes they did not come back at all. He told me about a hiker 9 years ago. The man went into the valley through a gap in the fence on the western side. Search and rescue spent 2 weeks combing the woods. They found nothing. Not a boot print, not a scrap of clothing, not a single trace. Then 3 months later, one of the inward-facing trail cameras caught the man walking a path inside the perimeter, heading toward the valley. He was dressed in clothes that were not the ones he had gone missing in. He looked healthy. He looked calm. He looked like he belonged there. He was never seen outside the perimeter again. Colton told me the organization did not understand what Grayton was. They were not scientists. They were not researchers. They did not study it or try to explain it. They were just the people who made sure the fence stayed up and the outside world stayed out. That was the job. That had always been the job, going back further than Colton himself, further than the man who had trained him, further than anyone could trace with certainty. I asked him why the town reached out to me, the woman at the fence. Colton shook his head slowly and said that sometimes it did that. Not often, but sometimes the town took an interest in the people on the perimeter, the ones who watched too long from the ridge, the ones who lingered. He asked me if I wanted to keep the job. I told him I needed to think about it. He said that was fine. I went back that night. I do not know why. Stubbornness, maybe, or the fact that I had spent 6 years as a deputy dealing with things that made sense in terrible ways, and here was something that did not make sense at all, and some part of me needed to see how far it went. Over the following week, things changed. The woman did not appear at the fence again, but the trail cameras that faced inward started picking up more activity. Not just one figure walking the paths toward the valley. Several. They moved at night, during my shift hours, always heading toward the town. I started to feel like they knew my schedule, like the rhythm of their movement was tuned to the rhythm of mine. One night, around 12:30, the two-way radio picked up something that was not static and was not Colton. It was faint, buried under a wash of interference, but I could make it out if I held still and listened. A calm voice, like a man reading announcements at a town meeting. He was saying something about a gathering at the town hall, something about a vote on road maintenance, and then, near the end, something about welcoming a guest. The broadcast lasted about 30 seconds and then dissolved back into white noise. I sat at the desk and stared at the radio and replayed it in my head for the rest of the shift. The word guest did not sound general. It did not sound like it was meant for the town at large. It sounded like it was meant for me. 3 nights later, at the start of my shift, I found something on the hood of the patrol truck. A folded piece of white paper, plain, with neat handwriting in black ink. It read, "You are welcome to come see for yourself. The gate on the south fence will be open tonight." I checked the south fence on my patrol. The gate, which was always padlocked with a heavy-duty chain, was standing wide open. The chain had not been cut. It had been removed, as if someone had a key, as if someone who maintained the fence had walked up and unlocked it and set it aside. The path beyond the gate led downhill through the trees. I could see the glow of the town lights filtering up through the canopy, warm and gold against the dark. It looked inviting. It looked like a place where people lived quiet, ordinary lives. Standing there at the open gate, I could hear something carried on the wind from the valley below. It might have been voices. It might have been music. It was faint and familiar in a way I could not place. Like a song I had known as a child and forgotten the words to. I stood at that gate for longer than I should have. The air coming up from the valley was warm, warmer than it should have been for that time of night. And it smelled like wood smoke and cut grass and something sweet underneath, like honeysuckle. Every part of it felt like an invitation. Every part of it felt like coming home to a place I had never been. I did not go through the gate. I closed it, wrapped my own chain around it, and drove back to the operations building. I picked up the landline and dialed the number on the tape. A voice answered that I did not recognize. Not Colton. Someone older. Someone whose voice had the worn quality of a man who had been doing this work for a very long time. He asked if the gate was open. I said yes. He asked how long I stood there. I told him a few minutes. He went quiet. Then he said, very carefully, "That is longer than most. We will send someone in the morning." The next morning, I found Colton and 2 people I had never seen before waiting at the operations building. One was a woman in plain clothes who never offered her name. The other was an older man who introduced himself only as Lyle. They were calm, professional, and completely unsurprised by anything I told them. They listened to everything: the open gate, the note, the radio broadcast, the figures on the trail cameras. They asked specific questions in the tone of people following a checklist they had used before. When I finished, Lyle sat on the edge of the desk and looked at me for a long moment. Then he told me what he thought I needed to hear. He said the town reached out sometimes. It found people who lingered at the edges, people who were curious, people who were alone. He said it was not malicious, not exactly. He could not say what it was with any certainty, because nobody in the organization could. But the people it invited in did not come back. Or if they did, they were different. They were calm, the way the woman at the fence had been calm. They were unhurried. They were at peace. and they never wanted to leave again. He told me about the last perimeter officer who had gone through a gate like that, a man named Caldwell. He had been on the night shift 4 years ago, same rotation I was working, same stretch of fence. One night, he walked through an open gate on the south side and went down into the valley. The cameras caught him for about a week afterward, walking the same paths as the others, heading into town each evening, coming back up toward the perimeter each morning, but never quite all the way to the fence. Each day he went a little less far from the valley, and then he was just one of them, just another resident of a town that does not exist. Lyle gave me a choice. I could stay on the job. New locks, new chain, adjusted patrol route that kept me away from the south fence for a while until things settled down. Or I could walk away, full pay through the end of the month, no questions asked, and a non-disclosure agreement that Lyle admitted was mostly a formality, since nobody would believe the story anyway. I took the second option. Lyle did not try to talk me out of it. He just nodded and shook my hand and said he understood. The woman, who never gave her name, handed me an envelope with paperwork inside and walked me to my car. As I was getting in, she said one thing to me. She said, "It will take a while for the feeling to fade. Do not make any decisions about this until it does." I did not know what she meant then. I do now. It has been 5 weeks since I left Site 4. I am back in the city. I have a different job, something in warehouse logistics that requires nothing of me beyond showing up and moving boxes from one place to another. During the day, I am fine. I do not think about Grayton. I do not think about the lights in the valley, or the woman at the fence, or the sound of that calm voice reading town announcements through a wash of static. But at night, when the apartment is quiet and the street outside has gone still, I hear it, faint, right at the edge of what I can make out, like a radio signal drifting in from a long way off. A man's voice, steady and pleasant, reading something about a meeting at the town hall, something about a budget vote, or a road repair, or a new family moving into a house on the east end of town. Normal things, small town things. And then, just before the signal fades, something about a guest who is expected soon. I tell myself it is not real. I tell myself it is residual anxiety, that my brain is filling in sounds from memory the way it does when you have spent too long in a quiet place. But the feeling the woman warned me about has not faded. If anything, it has gotten worse. There is a pull in my chest that was not there before I took the job. A low, constant ache that points in one direction, south and east, toward a valley in the Ozarks, where a town that does not appear on any map is waiting with its lights on and its gates open. I have started sleeping with the television on. The noise helps. It drowns out the broadcast, or at least makes it harder to pick out the words. But last night, for the first time, I heard something new. Mixed in with the town announcements, underneath the static, I heard my name. Just once, spoken clearly, the way you would call someone into dinner. I have not called the number on the landline. I have not called Colton. I do not know what I would say to either of them that they have not already heard from someone else, some other officer who stood at the gate too long and felt the warm air from the valley and heard the music that sounds like something you have always known. I just know that the television is not working as well as it used to. And I know that Grayton is patient. And I know that one of these nights, when the feeling is bad enough, and the pull is strong enough, and the voice on the edge of hearing says my name again, I am going to get in my car and drive. I am not sure I will be able to stop myself.